And Neil Armstrong said, the only bird that can talk is the parrot, and he does not fly very well. Now, Neil Armstrong was actually quoting Wilbur Wright, who was the first man to demonstrate heavier-than-air flight in Kitty Hawk in 1903. And Wilbur Wright said exactly the same thing. The only bird that can talk is the parrot, and he doesn't fly very well. Then he added, so I'll be brief, because Wilbur Wright didn't like public speaking very much, any more than Neil Armstrong appeared to. So we're going to refer to NASA's defenders as the Apollo parrots, because they can talk, but they don't know how to fly. They also introduce many arguments which, unless you're aware of them, and unless you're aware of what they're trying to achieve, well, not going to achieve very much, but what they're trying to do, they introduce straw man arguments. And they claim that people who deny the Apollo landings as being real, these straw man arguments will show what they claim the hoaxers say and then prove it wrong. That's a straw man argument. But people like me and Scott and Brandy and Trevor and David Percy and all the other people who have written about it and investigated never say half the things, or even a quarter of the things, that the NASA groupies, I'll call them that, the NASA groupies, say that they claim. Now, NASA groupies should go under the title of teeners. They're all teeners. There is no alternative scenario.
Right.
NASA groupies. Now, these groupies, there are plenty of them. Let's just name a few of them, just so we know who we're talking about. Let's start with Phil Platt, who writes the Bad Astronomy website and a book of the same name. Well, I think he's self-describing here, but let's not worry about that. We also have Amy Title at Vintage Space. She's forever banging on about how wonderful NASA is and parroting a lot of what they tell her to say. We have Curious Droid over here in the UK, aka Paul Shillito, who makes some very good videos, very good film, very informative, but he insists that the Apollo landings were real, which he hasn't proved yet. We have Keith Mays over here in the UK. He claims that the Soviets would have blown the whistle if it was all wrong. Well, the Soviets have blown the whistle. It's just that you haven't been listening, Keith. You keep banging on about these things that you claim are correct. When you do a bit of investigation, they're not. They can be proven to be false. Because the Soviets have said on numerous occasions that they would not be sending any cosmonauts to the moon until they could ensure their safe return due to the dangers of radiation. You know, this radiation which is like 2 X-rays, that's what you claim it to be. It's not. It's much more than that. The Soviets knew that. So get your act together. Get some facts correct. And as for your reporting of Bart Sibrel at the news conference conducted by the Apollo 11 astronauts on the 12th of August 1969, you claim that Bart Sibrel was there asking questions. Ha! He was 4 years old at the time. Get your act together, get some research, do some proper work, and stop making up stories and parroting what NASA tell you to say. Then we have Brant Watson, also known as Astrobant 2, who is extremely insulting. He mocks anybody who disagrees with him. He refuses to discuss anything other than what he thinks is the correct situation, which it isn't. In fact, I've featured in one of his mocking videos, and he thought he made a very good case. Trouble is, he didn't. He did it the way he thought it would work, not the way it actually worked. But we'll leave that for the moment because he's just a parrot. Then we have Paolo Atavissimo, who's Italian, so we're jumping around. There aren't too many people outside America and Britain that have investigated this. Paolo Attavissimo. He's a contributor to the Apollo Lunar Surface Journal. So guess who he supports? Haha, NASA. He's a parrot. He's even written a book on it.
I think he's a paid employee of NASA.
He may well be a paid employee of NASA because he spends a lot of time defending NASA's position. Well, somebody has to defend it because NASA don't want to do it because they're discovering now that Apollo was fake because they can't repeat what they did 50-odd years ago with Apollo. They can't repeat it. They keep putting it back and they keep saying, give me more money. And they say it's harder than we thought. And they haven't solved the radiation problem yet either.
But NASA's not even in the space business anymore.
No.
They don't have anything that flies.
No. Well, if they have anything that flies, and they haven't got the Space Launch System, the SLS, off the ground yet, and anything they do send up into space, they have to use Russian engines for it, Russian rocket engines. So what on earth are
they don't have anything themselves.
No, they don't.
They've been defunct for 10 years, which is amazing. And people still think that they're a viable source of spaceflight, and they're not.
Well, I think that people at NASA, there's nobody working at NASA now who was working at NASA during the Apollo era. So the people who are there now, obviously enthusiasts about space travel, otherwise they wouldn't work for NASA. They might go and work for SpaceX or Blue Origin. And most of them seem to be doing that at the moment. But they're discovering that what NASA claimed to have achieved 50 years ago never happened because they can't repeat it. So you've got all the NASA groupies, the NASA teeners, who are defending NASA to the death, it seems, because that's the only thing they can do. They have to keep repeating the same story, hence parrots. They're the Apollo parrots.
If you are raised in the rabbit hole or born in the rabbit hole, you have no idea that you're in the rabbit hole.
No, you think that's your world.
That's right.
Until you pop your head up and have a look above you. Oh, look, there's a whole world out here. I wonder what they're saying.
Yeah.
It's the people who have actually done the work, done the research, looked at the Apollo record, investigated it, which is what you should do as an author, and there are plenty of people who've done it. The first one, obviously, is well known, is Bill Casing. Back in 1976, he produced his book, We Never Went to the Moon, America's $30 billion Swindle.
Yeah, he popped his head out of the rabbit hole, didn't he?
He did. He had a look around and thought, I don't believe this. And he was close enough. He worked at Rocketdyne, who made the engines for the Saturn V rocket. And he said, no, never happened. Couldn't happen. Some of the things he said may be a little bit dated now. That doesn't matter. He was the first person to raise the subject that there was something to investigate. That was followed up in 1992 by Ralph Renee, who wrote his book NASA Mooned America and produced some remarkably accurate scientific evidence to demonstrate that it didn't happen. NASA Mooned America. When you ask these Apollo parrots what investigation they've done, they will never say that they've read any of these books because they don't want to contaminate their mind. So if they haven't read the books, they don't know what people are saying. The NASA parrots, the Apollo parrots, they just come along and say, well, this is what they said, and this is why it's wrong. Well, of course it's wrong because you said it, you parrot. Then you have William Bryan III, who wrote the book Moongate. And then in 1999, possibly the definitive book on the subject at that time, David Percy and Mary Bennett's book, Dark Moon. An extraordinarily detailed look at the whole Apollo landing and why it was faked. There's James Collier, there's Gerhard Wisniewski's book, One Small Step. That was 2012. And then the really important book started coming out. 2018, Randy Walsh published the first of his two books, Hiding a Hoax in Plain Sight, Book 1 and Book 2. And then Trevor Weaver in the UK has written 4 books in the last 3 years. The Apollo moon hoax, fact or fiction, was his first one. And the last one, Apollo moon hoax, the real evidence, co-authored with yours truly. Now, Trevor Weaver's books, nearly 1,500 pages. Randy Walsh's book is over 500 pages. Dark Moon is over 500 pages. These are serious books. And if you're going to criticize what some of these people are saying, you've got to read their books and see what they say. And I will tell you that if you do read the books, and these NASA parrots have obviously not read the books because they're not saying the things which you would expect them to say if they had read them, if they do read the book, they'll find that NASA have been lying. Never a straight answer. Somebody accused me of being insulting to NASA. I said, no, I wasn't being insulting. I was just repeating what the New York Times wrote in 1968 at their frustration of being unable to get a definitive answer out of anybody at NASA. Hence, now never a straight answer. It was when Jim Webb was still a NASA administrator, after whom the new telescope is named. The James Webb Space Telescope is going to be launched from French Guiana because NASA can't launch it. They've got to get the French to do it. Oh, good. It's going up on an Ariane rocket, Ariane 6. I hope it works. So you've got all these people who've written about the Apollo fraud or the Apollo hoax in considerable detail, and if you're going to criticize what they say, you have to have read what they've written. Now, a lot of people will come along and say, well, I've done that. I know what these people are saying. No, you don't. There's a book produced by Peter Bassett, who's based in the UK. He claims to have a mobile planetarium, which he takes around to schools, educating children about astronomy, which is an applaudable objective. And he's written this book because so many people in America, because he goes to America and claims to know about it. And in his book, he starts each chapter with a little comment from what he claims is somebody like myself, who's challenging NASA. But he gets it wrong, and he just makes the whole thing up, so he answers his own question. That's not investigation, that's not research, that's not even proper commentary. It's called straw man argument. You make up a comment and then show it's wrong. Well, of course you can show it's wrong if you made it up in the first place. And the number of errors in this book is appalling, absolutely appalling. Let's not go on any more about that. Now, you mentioned the films. Bart Sabrell's done films. Funny thing happened on the way to the moon. Aaron Rainan, Did They Go? He was commissioned by Illinois State, because that's where Neil Armstrong came from. They wanted to prove that Neil Armstrong was a local hero. But when Aaron did his film, Did They Go?, he found they didn't, because none of the records existed. Then we have Jim Collier, Was It Only a Paper Moon? Amusing efforts to try to measure the width of the hatch between the command module and the lunar module. And he wasn't allowed to get a cherry picker to go up and measure it because that wasn't permitted. So what are they trying to hide? It was basically to demonstrate that you couldn't go between the command module and the lunar module in a spacesuit.
I think his in particular, he was giving NASA the absolute opportunity to say, here you go, show us how you did it.
He was, yeah. And he spent quite a long time investigating it. He did it very calmly, very methodically.
They were given the opportunity to say, this is how we did it.
Yeah, and what was this interview? Was it Gene Kranz?
NASA failed miserably.
That's what's coming up. People they're failing so miserably. Then we have Gerald White, who's put 600 films up on his YouTube channel, moonfaker.com, demonstrating little aspects of how the Apollo story is fake. David Percy film, What Happened on the Moon. Massimo Mazzucco's film, American Moon, one of the best films around. Jet Windsor, Moon Hoax Now, where he demonstrates some remarkably anomalous events occurring on the moon. And Ted Aranda's dissection of the Apollo missions. They're long films because there's a lot to dissect. I mean, this was an activity that employed over 400,000 people, we keep being told. Yeah, it probably did. 400,000 people did work for the contractors that NASA employed to create the landers and the rockets and the rovers and all the other bits and pieces, the spacesuits, the things needed to, what they thought would be needed to get to the moon. The other things that people say is 400,000 people can't keep a secret. Why did they need to keep a secret? There was no secret to keep with Apollo. Secrets can be kept. Of course they can. Enigma codes were broken during World War II. That's the German military codes. They were broken in the UK by Alan Turing at Bletchley Park. For 30 years, nobody knew anything about it. 10,000 people worked at Bletchley Park. A lot of people knew the codes had been broken because they were using them to find out where the Nazi forces were going to be attacking from. So they knew about it. 10,000 people kept the secret because it was in their interest to do so. But there was no secret to keep with Apollo. So these idiots who keep coming up and saying, oh, 400,000 people can't keep a secret, therefore it leaked out, therefore there wasn't a hoax, are completely wrong. What a stupid thing to say. The D-Day landings employed 1 million people. That didn't leak out until the forces hit the Normandy beaches.
Consider that, and people taking anything NASA says right at face value without questioning it. And I think that is the biggest thing. You have all these people out there supporting it, and it's not like they're not intelligent people. And they've certainly absorbed a lot of data from NASA, but they never question it.
They don't investigate it. They don't ask the question.
I was, a space enthusiast forever. I was in high school when Apollo launched and everything else, and our high school teachers, the whole 9 yards, they got you into it. They were watching the MIT videos, right, from the 1960s, everything else, right? I've always been reading. I always like to read technical data. So here I am absorbing all of this stuff and taking it for face value up until the mid-2000s, and then I started to go, holy cow, let's go back and reread this.
Yeah.
Right? And here's all the testing they're doing. Here's all doing this. Well, all of the stuff failed. They didn't have successful tests. Everything they tested failed. So where is the document that said, this is the material that we tested that works? And that's what everything that they're doing. And you can go into the server and pull those PDF files up there, and you'll see all of the problems, but there's no result. There's no positive result on it. And when you realize that, you go, holy cow, I could have been just like those people, just supporting NASA and going and not questioning it. And then when you start to do research into it and see how ridiculous it is.
It is.
When you look at any of the images and you see it's not just the lighting, it's not just this and that, the suits that they're wearing, everything else, they're in the museums. You can go in, you could be overwhelmed. You walk into one of their museums, you'd be completely overwhelmed because you're going to walk past a Saturn V rocket and they are monsters, and that thing actually worked. And then you walk in and you take a look at all of the stuff that they so-called have on display for the Apollo missions, right? And there's the spacesuit.
Yeah.
Well, that spacesuit doesn't work. First of all, they got zippers. They don't do up. They have quick connects on the helmet and the gloves that don't seal. They would never hold pressure, and yet it's on display. It's just like the moon rocks are on display, but they don't contain any radiation.
No.
And that's not possible. If the moon rocks don't absorb radiation, then, then we have to rethink what the Van Allen belts are protecting us from.
Always good to see a moon rock when you talk about it.
Yep.
Here's my moon rock. Now, if NASA want to come and get it, you know where I live. It's not difficult. Piece of moon rock.
Looks like a chocolate chip cookie that got hard.
Yeah, it's quite good. It's very old. I mean, it must be very old.
Yeah.
And of course, don't forget the photographic film that can't work in a vacuum. I've never heard any of NASA's groupies talking about vacuum and what tests they would do and how it can do it. The only person who's done the test is Robert Williams and yourself. You went out and bought a vacuum chamber to test it. And you found a photographic film doesn't work after it's been in a vacuum.
And the other thing is when they're talking about vacuum, they say, oh, it only goes down to this much and no more.
Yeah.
It just has a differential of 1 atmosphere. And yet, Robert had to buy 2 machines. And the first one, when you put water into it, it takes 15 to 20 seconds as it's sucking it down, and then the water starts to boil a little bit. And then the more powerful one that he's got, as soon as you turn the switch on, the water virtually is gone. It just boils out of there, right? We're only talking what his machine is capable of, maybe 40 miles off the surface, not even in space. And then you have vacuum chambers that are built, and I mean, NASA spent at least 10% of their budget. The Sandusky chambers were $1.6 billion in 1969. Just unbelievable. And they've never put a human being inside that thing.
They wouldn't dare put a human being inside it.
It's only equivalent to 130 miles up. If it's not that severe of a problem, people should be practicing with their spacesuits on, testing the spacesuits in there. It should have an airlock on it, so you can just walk in and out, and there'd be dozens of people in there working around in it and doing this stuff in their suits, practicing to go to space with.
But they're doing all their testing underwater, which is the reverse of a vacuum. It's pressure.
Well, you can't even test the suit because the pressure in an underwater suit is balancing out the pressure of the water.
Yeah.
So the two forces, when they are absolutely equal, there's actually zero pressure on the suit itself.
Yeah.
The exact opposite in space.
Which is why the ridiculous movement you see people doing on the moon, allegedly, the sort of slow motion stuff, is because that's how they practiced underwater. It's all slow motion because you can't move very fast underwater. We know that. There is so much wrong with what NASA are doing. As you say, they can't even get a rocket off the ground at the moment. The space launch system isn't working. They haven't got any spacesuits. They haven't got a lander yet, not even designed. They haven't got anybody to get them there. And they're supposed to get there by the end of 2024. It won't happen.
Yeah. I think one of the biggest mistakes that NASA has made is that they've released absolute unbelievable amount of documentation. So they have covered every second of every trip, there and back. And now when they make an error in depicting that, in simulating that, and they simply forget that the guy that's orbiting for 3 days has got to be part of the conversation somewhere, and it's not there, and they have it all written in transcript, every word that is said between the two guys on the ground. And you can't tell me that they weren't talking to that guy.
Of course they were talking to him, but they were probably asking him questions they didn't want people to know about. So that wasn't part of the script.
But every second is covered. And when he's coming around and the signal gets back, he'd be checking in to make sure everything's okay.
Yeah, of course he would.
That's not in the script, and now they can't add it.
No.
They can't modify it, the same as they can't get rid of that wet flag, because I've been waiting for them.
It's good, I like that.
Right? And they can't get rid of Buzz in the door anymore, right?
No.
He's there.
No, he's there. Anybody can do this. You've got all the dimensions of the lunar module, so you know what size the door is. You can build one, just out of bits of cardboard or bits of plywood. You can build the equivalent size. You know what the internal measurements are. You know what the internal view is. Just build it and demonstrate that that picture is fake, because that's what you'll do if you build it correctly. So come on, guys.
All of these things, when they've done all of this detail, and they've got the transcripts, they've got the video and the audio and the pictures. Yeah. Anything that's wrong in there, they can't get rid of anymore.
No, they can't.
They do try. They update those PDF files. Like I said, when they're updating equipment, like on the LEM, they went into the landing gear on the LEM because there's problems with it in the photographs, right? They started out with it, and the original document has 2 honeycomb mesh compression things in there when it slides down. There's no springs, there's no hydraulics, there's no nothing. So these things can compress 32 inches down, and did it in 2 stages, right? The secondary struts had the same compression honeycomb aluminum mesh in it as well. But the first one only had it in one direction. And the second PDF file, when they come out with now the secondary struts, because they need to move either way, both directions, because they're coming in. So they updated that. And then the third one, they updated the main struts again, and now they have 3 honeycomb mesh in. Okay.
Right.
And they have a bearing in there so that it slides down, because you're going to get that sideways thrust against the 2 tubes sliding. So now they put a bearing in there as well.
Because people like yourself have identified the problem. NASA now have to correct the problem so that they will be seen to have done it right. By identifying those sort of problems, you're actually causing NASA a lot of problem, a lot of difficulty, because they have to keep rummaging through their records to see what it is they have to change. And one of the things they've had to change is that famous photograph of Buzz Aldrin, allegedly, man on the moon. File number AS11405903. It's a very famous photograph. It's used usually to depict man on the moon, because that's what it's supposed to represent. If you look at the original of that photograph, you'll notice that there is what is known photographically as light fall-off. If it was illuminated by the sun, the foreground would be the same illumination as the background, but it's not. There is fall-off, i.e. there's a brighter foreground than there is a background. And because this is being picked up by a lot of people discussing the photographic anomalies, which I've done on a few occasions, what NASA have now done is to replace that photograph on their files and quite a lot of the other files. The file I use is the Lunar and Planetary Institute website, because it's easy to use, and it's been replaced with a brightened version, so the fall-off is no longer quite so visible. But you can always identify the original photograph from the newly created brightened version, which looks very flat and very uninteresting. They're all digitized now. They originally on film, this stuff.
Yeah.
They were all on Kodak Ektachrome, transparency material, scanned in, so it's now available on websites. What they've had to do now is to change that photograph to a brightened version, so the fall-off, which has been commented on by a lot of people, is no longer quite so visible. But if you do the simple expedient of take the new photograph and darken it down, hey presto, the fall-off starts to be visible again. And you can always tell, there's a very simple way to tell if the photograph has been changed. Look at the top of Aldrin's helmet. In the original photograph, it's quite dark, almost black. There's a shadow.
Yeah.
The new photograph, it's really quite lightened. It's grey. That's how you tell the difference. It's very simple. And NASA can't do anything about it unless they Photoshop it, which they're not very good at, I should say.
Well, I would imagine there was quite a number of versions of that particular image, because I guess for magazines and stuff, they'd be touching it up and airbrushing it, but they probably weren't aware that there was fall-off in it. They did it up, I recall it in Time magazine, that photograph on the front page, on the cover, and there it is, and the fall-off is there. And if you even look at the original, you can Google the original for Time Life and all of the other magazines that were posting it, and that photograph has been touched up professionally and looks nice, centered, picture perfect. I think they even added the extra spacing at the top to just center it more, right?
That's right.
But the fall-off is still there. And of course, you can't blame that on the camera.
No, of course not.
because the cameras were far too good.
Yeah, the cameras were the best they could buy, which is one of the sensible things they did. Hasselblad cameras using Zeiss lenses and Kodak film. It's a good combination. It's a combination that would be appropriate then, it's appropriate now, which incidentally have their shutter inside the lens. So each lens has their own shutter. And just a point on the lenses, if you examine the record, specifically the Apollo 11 press pack, it'll tell you what camera was used, what lenses were used, and what film was used. It's all there in black and white. It's not colour. It's all there. People get these wrong. Some of these idiot parrots say, oh, they used a standard lens. No, they didn't use a standard lens. They used a wide-angle lens. And they had a telephoto lens. Yes, they did. It wasn't a 300mm lens. Hasselblad don't have a 300mm lens. They used a 250mm lens. These are the details which show up the incompetence of the parrots. They don't know what they're talking about half the time, but they claim that they do.